So as you guys know, I'm a big Starcraft fan, particularly a fan of Starcraft 2. I started playing ladder last year. I made the gold with Protoss and Zerg. Gold with Protoss because it's my main, gold with Zerg because no one knows how Zerg plays, so it's not that hard to get to gold. That being said, I've been kind of wanting to go back and replay the original Starcraft. Not so much for the gameplay, but just the missions that was fun, the story's fun. I've replayed the campaigns in 2 a couple of times, and I'm like, you know what? I want something a bit different. I want to go back and have my redemption run. I had this game when I was a kid. I was like 10, 11 years old. I tried playing it, and it was a complete and total disaster. I had to use cheats basically to get through the entire game. I didn't really play it legitimately at all. It wasn't even just like I used a mineral cheat at the beginning because your economy is so bad in StarCraft 1. It was like I would just turn on invincibility and do the mission. And I would still sometimes fail despite that, but I was young and stupid. And I'm like, you know what? I can actually play this game kind of now. I can beat people in online, at least in Silver and Bronze League. So let's go back and let's have a redemption run. The problem is, of course, that StarCraft 1 has aged. It's aged a lot. And there are certain things like not being able to rally your workers to mineral patches, not having select all army, not being able to select more than like 16 units at a time, that kind of make it unplayable for me. These things are kind of deal breakers. The changes that have been made in terms of interface and quality of life are very hard to go back from. More so than even just the graphics or the physics or any of the stuff like that. Just how much they improved upon all this stuff in StarCraft 2 is just something I couldn't give up. But a friend of mine's like, no, Argent, you don't have to compromise. There is the mass recall mod for StarCraft 2, in which they went in and they remade all the campaigns, both from the original StarCraft and from Brood War. They put in the briefing screens. They took all the audio clips. There's an additional thing you can download that gives you the cutscenes. They're all here. They added in their own cutscenes. They made some original ones. They added in, actually it's kind of cool, they added in some characters, like Matt Horner is now in a bunch of cutscenes standing next to Raynor, which I think is pretty cool. But overall, they did a legit job. They completely successfully remade StarCraft 1 and StarCraft 2. And I started playing it, and I was having a lot of fun, but then I got about halfway through Rebel Yell, and I just started noticing something. I'm like, geez, this game's a lot harder than I remember it being. I don't think I'm that bad at it. So I went and I looked at the website. So it is true that they have massively increased the difficulty of this from the original game as a way of countering the fact that if they just made it like the original game, it would be too easy because the controls work properly. So they turned the difficulty up to like 11 with this one. I'd say easy in this game is probably about what normal was, or what the standard difficulty was in original StarCraft. Normal in this is really hard. I've been replaying the StarCraft 2 campaigns on hard. I would say that normal in Mass Recall is harder than hard is in SC2. It's probably more like brutal in SC2. It's really difficult. Now, what makes it really hard is a couple things. One, the economy in one is a bit different. You only start off with a couple SUVs or worker units. A lot of the macro mechanics we get in SC2, you just don't have anymore. You don't have mules, you don't have chrono boost, you don't have queens. So if you're playing Zerg, you have to build like 1 billion macro hatches. Terran doesn't get mules. Protoss, you have to build multiple nexuses. It takes a really long time compared to SC2 to get going and to actually get an army built. That's the first issue. The second issue is they've made it so that the AI just gets a ton more units. Like an absurd amount. It feels like a tower defense game at times if you're playing it on normal. And they aren't just like low tier units. They will send in like in the like mission 4 or 5. They'll start sending in guardians and like ultralisks and stuff like that. The AI is also surprisingly competent. Like they will attack you from multiple directions at a time. They'll do drops all over the place. And in a sense, it's kind of a good thing because it's nice to see the AI being a little bit more creative, the AI being a bit more aggressive. The issue is just the sheer number of units that they throw at you relative to what you're able to produce is just kind of a joke. I don't think it's really fair, and I kind of it hurt my enjoyment of some of these missions. I will say though, the difficulty is very dependent upon some other things. Here, this game sucked. The heroes die really easily, so I would sometimes lose those missions just because I forgot that heroes are tied to select all army hotkey. I probably should have just like built the like a cage around the hero or something. But there was that. It's also extremely dependent on what race you're going up against. So basically, in this game, there's playing as Terran and going up against Terran Terran, and then there's everything else. I was never very good at Terran in StarCraft 1, but it really makes me appreciate like a lot of the balanced decisions they made with SC2. So the problem with Terran in StarCraft 1 is their air units, they have 2 air units. You have the Wraith and the Battlecruiser. The Battlecruiser in SC1 is a joke. I hated it when I was a kid, and I hate it now. It's just slow, it doesn't really do that much damage. It's incredibly vulnerable to just basically everything. They also get the Wraith, though, which is a stealth unit. And having Terran get like a stealth unit as their core flyer is a very questionable choice because it means very early on in the campaign, and as Terran you're mostly fighting other Terrans, the AI will just start spamming stealth units. And Terran has the worst detection of the 3 factions because they don't have observers and they don't have overlords. So your base will just immediately be spammed with Wraiths, and they will spam you with Wraiths at all times. They will attack you. And basically it just means you need to constantly have detection, but you get Wraiths like way earlier than you get science vessels. So there'll be a number of missions where your only detection is missile turrets and scans. And you just kind of have to hope that you get lucky. The other issue with facing Terran is the AI will just spam siege tanks. Like every square inch of the map will be covered by siege tanks, and just getting through them is a massive pain. I found when I was playing as like Zerg, I just went Sky Zerg most of the time against Terran because there was so many siege tanks that it was just almost impossible to move anywhere. And I mean, I guess in order to do it, you could like do some micro or like I don't know, use defilers or casters or something. But from like even very early on, it gets incredibly frustrating when anything you do just gets stopped by massive numbers of siege tanks. And once again, the AI gets an immense production bonus in this game. So they're going to throw a lot of siege tanks at you. And it just makes playing against Terran just very unfun. In my opinion. Something else, and maybe this was part of the original, you have to do a lot of dropping in this compared to SC2. Like, a lot of the resource bases and enemy bases are on platforms that you have to drop your forces to. Which is interesting, because it's something I don't really have a lot of experience with, and that's kind of fun. But once again, it can be kind of difficult given just the sheer numbers of forces that your enemies will throw at you. So like if they might have thrown maybe 10 units at you when you're trying to do a landing in the first game, now they throw like 30 to 40 units at you. So it makes you have to just kind of readjust a lot of things. I think on easy this game is pretty fair. It depends, like I said, though, very much on the mission and very much on what the matchup is. Like I find Zerg and Protoss are way easier to play as in SC1. If only because they have more balanced units. Hydralisks and Zerglings will get you through most of the game, as will Dragoons and Zealots. Marines, though, playing it also makes me kind of respect a lot of the balance decisions they made in SC2. I feel like they took a lot of units in SC1 and split them in half and made two specialized units. Like, for instance, the Dragoon in the first game is kind of a medium, all-purpose ranged unit. And they split it in half, and the tanky, high-damage part of that went to the Immortal, and the flexible shoot-up, shoot-down aspect went into the Stalker. And I much prefer having those two units. Well, actually, I don't for the Dragoon, but in some cases, it's nice to be able to have that choice where if you need something that just can blow through a super heavily fortified line, then having Immortal's nice. And if you need something, I guess, to just kind of throw in, and Stalkers are nice too. And it also really makes me realize how many gaps there was in a lot of arsenals that they filled in. Like in StarCraft 1, if you want to play Bio, which I did for a lot of the Terran missions just because Marines and Medics are really efficient, you really find yourself missing Marauders and even like Hellbats. Because in this game you have Firebats, which aren't very good, Ghosts, Marines, and Medics. And Marines just aren't very good against things like Ultralisks or buildings or siege tanks, and I really find myself missing having an anti-armor infantry that I could throw into my bio ball and use. And I just kept like hitting the create Marauder button just out of kind of habit. Also just like units in this game that don't really make a lot of sense, like the Vulture I just don't think makes a lot of sense as a unit, compared to, say, the Hellion, which I think fills much more of a specialized role. I guess the Vulture is kind of like that. Also, the Vulture can drop mines. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But I just find, like, for a lot of this stuff, like, the Goliath, I think, got split into... Or rather, the Wraith and Goliath got mixed up, and we got the Banshee, the Viking, and the Cyclone. And I like that better because like they actually do something more specific. I mean, I do like Goliaths in the first game because they're a very versatile unit, but Wraiths are kind of shitty. Like, I'd rather have something like a Banshee that can actually do some air-to-ground damage than something that happens to have stealth but does shit damage. Vikings are a lot better and just more interesting because they serve as a hard counter to air units and as a hard counter to ground mechanical units. The Cyclone at least does something very specific. It's a fast... moving, although I guess they've changed it a couple more times. But it's nice to kind of have that variety. Also, some of the units that were in SC1 were just shit. Like, Scouts, I think, are the worst unit in the game. As a kid, I thought my game was bugged because of how little damage Scouts did. And it's so much better now that we have Void Rays and Oracles and just any, like, of the new Protoss stuff. Also, Protoss ground armies in SC1 were literally just Zealots and Dragoons. There was, like, nothing else in them. You could maybe throw in a couple of Reavers, but in 2, well, I guess there was Archons in 1. But in 2, you got Immortals, you got Colossi, there's just a lot more options that kind of really round the thing out. There's also, I guess, Disruptors. They kind of split the Reaver into the Colossus and the Disruptor, I guess you could say. I just feel like there aren't the gaping holes in the various armies that you had in the first game. And like I said, I think Terran in particular is the most just weird in terms of its balance, because everything just seems to be balanced around siege tanks, which I guess in 2 it kind of is as well. But that just seems to be like what the AI does, is just spam siege tanks constantly. It is, though, like, those are kind of my thoughts on it. I do think on the whole it is very good. I do think, though, if you play this and you find yourself really struggling, at least on normal difficulty, it's not because you're bad at it, and it's not because you're bad at the original. It is the same game, but it's a very different game. And it's not just stuff like what I mentioned. It's also stuff like the various races' macro mechanics aren't here anymore. That is, you don't have queens, you don't have chrono boost, you don't have mules, and that just massively slows down the pace of the game. Because it takes forever for your economy to get up. Meanwhile, you're just getting hit time and time and time again, like it's some sort of a tower defense game, and they keep sending in bigger waves. And the first 10 to 15 minutes of this game are just a struggle to try to stay alive until you can finally actually do something. Maybe the original StarCraft was like that too, and I just don't remember. But on the whole, though, I think if you haven't played the original StarCraft, or you would like to replay it, but you can't put up with the various issues that it had, this is a pretty solid way to go back and give it another shot. Something to keep in mind is all the cheats from the original still work in this game. There was a couple levels where I admit I had to use them, largely because I had to keep repeating missions because heroes would die, or just sometimes at the beginning of the level they give you so little resources to start out with. The worst is a Zerg, because it's a while till you can put any macro hatches down, and your production is just so shitty until you get like 3 or 4 hatcheries. So sometimes I just give myself like 500 extra minerals so I could build an extra command center or something and get my economy going. Also, just sometimes I feel like the doom stacks the AI sends at you, particularly in the early game, can just get unfair. You'll just barely be starting it, and then they'll send like 30 endgame units with like 3/3 upgrades at you, and it can get kind of rough. Overall, though, I got through most of the game with minimal use of cheats. I did skip the commando levels, because fuck those. I guess they're cool as a kid, but if I'm replaying it, I just always skip. If there's like an installation level or a no base level, I'm here to play this as a macro game. I don't really want to just spend the whole time microing Marines in like some facility somewhere. It was cool as a kid, it's just not something I'm interested in doing now. But overall, I think Mass Recall is good. Definitely give it a try if you like StarCraft. God bless, and more fun content to come.